Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Secret Sunday session today. Today, I'm joined by a practicing dietitian, Sophie, who lives in Australia and is practicing helping people in this space, working with their relationship with food as well as their body. And today, we're going to be talking about concepts like food freedom, what that looks like for people in the 21st century, and how you can really accomplish that in your life with all this noise that seems to be going on in social media and diet culture. So, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Secret Sunday session.
Yay, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat today.
Yeah, it's great to have you on and obviously talk about these topics that are just so necessary right now. But before we get started into that, for those people that don't know who you are, do you just want to explain a little bit about who it is that you are, what you're doing, and why you got into dietetics?
I am an accredited practicing dietitian. I've been working as a dietitian for the past couple of years. I have my own online private practice where I see clients all over Australia and some international as well. I have mostly my clinic focuses on disordered eating. I see a bit of gut health as well, but I really am so passionate about helping people find freedom with food and moving away from diet culture. I guess I got into dietetics myself because I did, when I was younger, have a pretty poor relationship with food. Mainly when I was kind of like in my later teenage years, like fell into that trap of diet culture and dieting. Got very restrictive with my food. I've pretty much done everything under the sun that my clients come to me with. So calorie counting, trying skinny teas, diets, binge eating, like everything. And then I guess I was obviously very interested in nutrition, which kind of led me to the point of wanting to become a dietitian. And obviously before that, kind of repairing my own relationship with food. And I think it is such a journey for most people when we've been taught for so long by the media and society and everything that, our body and how we look, and, all of the things that are associated with that, like, exercise and our diets and all of those things are so important, when in reality, like, the most important thing is feeling good and living a happy life and all of those types of things. So that's, I think, what my main goal with my clients, and I guess like with my social media and that kind of thing as well, is putting a big focus on doing things to feel your best rather than putting a focus on weight or how you look. Because I think traditionally dietitians have always been like the diet police, or, people are always like, oh, you're a dietitian, like, can you make me a meal plan? And I'm like, no, I don't do that. So I think I try to take a bit of a different approach with how I practice, and really just focusing on health rather than dieting, I guess.
I love that. And as I said, like it's so needed in the world that we're living in today with so much information telling us what is good, what is bad, and what we should be consuming, what we shouldn't be. And I mean, you hear a lot of stories and a lot of young people go through this, especially in their adolescence, that they reach a point where all of a sudden the idea of what food freedom is, where they can just eat whatever they want,
Mhm.
changes.
Yeah.
Why don't you think that during adolescence we go from being a carefree kid, we eat whatever we want, we feel like there's no consequences, or we don't think about the consequences of food, and then all of a sudden that just changes. Why do you think that does during our adolescence?
I think obviously like our bodies go through a lot of changes then, and kids can be so mean, and there's a lot of kind of focus on how we look. And I think, of course, as well, like with relationships and all these different things that are happening, we feel really self-conscious. And I think like that is such a vulnerable time, where our bodies are going through so many changes, where people tend to start to feel maybe out of control, or they're not used to like their body looking a certain way. And for a lot of people, wanting to feel in control of that can lead them to dieting or, really focusing highly on their food and their bodies. And I think especially with social media and things like TikTok and everything like that, which is so accessible nowadays to children and young adults, it really kind of like fuels that idea that our bodies are so important to kind of like who we are and, whether we're going to be worthy of, different things in life. And I think people get really kind of sucked into that. And again, like the diet and wellness industry is like a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's like all of these companies and corporations trying to sell these things to us. And so it can really get in people's heads, especially, when you're so young as well and not able to, realize, how detrimental some of these things can be.
I think it's really scary as well when we look at, there's people as young as, say, 11
Yeah.
that are looking to disordered eating behaviors because they
Mhm.
want that sense of control and that sense of worth that comes from that. But when we look at, food as a mechanism for people to control, why do we think people turn to food and to fixing their body? Like, what external use is it giving these people or feeling are people getting from this?
I think it can be, yeah, eating disorders and disordered eating and feeling in control um, can be a big trigger. So it's not always necessarily for how they look. It can just be that feeling of feeling in control of one aspect of their life. Whereas, a lot of the time those types of people maybe don't feel as in control of other aspects of their life. So they feel like food or exercise or that kind of thing is the one thing that they do have some sort of control over, and it can kind of bring them that feeling of ease, where, although it may not be such a healthy coping mechanism, it is a way of, I guess, coping with other aspects of their life. But then, again, we also see people who, are led into disordered eating from more of the body image side of things and feeling uncomfortable in their bodies or being bullied or, just feeling like they want to achieve a certain body type, which then kind of fuels on disordered eating behaviors. And I guess like when we do get into disordered eating behaviors, it can be really difficult to kind of move away from those because then they feel so natural. And the more that we kind of put our energy into certain things or, our brains get used to doing things a certain way, it can be really challenging to, I guess, move away from those things.
Mm. I think it's hard as well when we talk about social media and diet culture and just the media and how behaviors that are disordered can also be glamorized. And that can be
Absolutely.
really hard for, I guess, a young person to navigate, okay, what is right and what is wrong then when you have this organization telling you you shouldn't be eating this, but then there's that other argument that no, eat whatever you want. And it can be very confusing. And how does someone navigate themselves through all this information and know actually what is quote unquote right for them and what is not so great for their body?
Yeah, I think that is something that is a huge challenge, because there is so much information out there nowadays with social media and TikTok and Instagram and whatever. And it can be so difficult for people to be like, oh, well, what is right for me? And there's so many people out there who are not qualified, or sometimes they are even qualified, and like, putting out all of this information or glamorizing, as you said, disordered behaviors, especially I would say in the fitness industry, where, we're seeing what I eat in a day videos where they start out with a video of their abs or, that type of thing, where it's like, okay, but what does that actually have to do with what you're eating? And why is what you're eating relevant to me at all? But I think that's become so normalized nowadays that we're like, oh yeah, what I eat in a day, like, oh, maybe I should be eating like that so I can look like them, even though it's not explicitly saying that. The undercurrent of the message is, this is how I look like this. You should eat like this so that you can look like me. And that's why it often gets so many clicks, and that's why people continue to make these types of videos. But I think the reality is that eating like someone else is not going to make you look like them. I really love the analogy of, you know, a bulldog could eat the same as a poodle and it would never look like a poodle. And I think that's so relevant to different people because, yeah, we're all humans, but we all have different genetics and we all have different lifestyles and we all have, you know, so many differences between us. And just because you're eating the same food as someone else is not going to make you look like them. But I think in terms of navigating all of the different messages that we get on social media, I think it's really important to be super critical of everything that you take in, because yeah, a lot of the information out there, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I think like finding what is right for you, like really thinking about, well, does this fit into my lifestyle? Is this a food that I actually enjoy? Is this way of eating actually making me feel good? Or is this feeling quite restrictive or difficult for me? And if it's feeling restrictive or difficult, it's probably not the right way of eating for you.
I think it's one of those things where, yeah, it is very difficult, and even to remove yourself from those environments when it's just everywhere. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like conversations with friends, and I hear a lot as well, a lot of young people that are even comparing their own daily food routine, let's say that, with their friends. And
Yeah.
they're saying that, you know, their friends are eating less than them, yet they have to eat more, or they're hungry at different times, and yet they're confusing that messaging within themselves because they're going, well, she's not eating that, so why do I have to eat that?
Yeah.
How does someone also put themselves in that environment and continue to eat the way they want, not feel judged in those situations when, say, their friend is eating one meal a day and that works for them,
Mm-hmm.
but not let that affect them and change the way that they eat and their routine?
Yeah. I think, again, it really comes back to reminding yourself that you are like you and you are not whoever else is around you, and everyone needs something different, and everything is, you know, it's going to be different for someone else compared to what your body needs. As I said earlier, like you've got different genetics, you've got a different lifestyle, you've probably got different activity levels, you've got everything that is different
Mhm.
about you. And again, like really, it comes down to honoring what your body needs to make you feel your best. Because, yeah, you can do what your friend does and eat when they eat and all of those types of things. But if you're then feeling really fatigued or you're feeling really hungry because you're not eating when your body is signaling to you that it needs food, you're not going to feel your best. And it's not going to, fuel your body in the best way possible.
Mhm. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then, I mean, we then move on to the concept of food freedom. It's getting thrown around a lot in
Yeah.
this world that we're living in, as well as sort of that counter argument to diet culture. What does food freedom actually mean?
So I guess it's a way of eating where you're able to eat without having any rules or restrictions and not feeling any guilt or fear around food. So essentially being able to eat what you want. Um, Again, a lot of people tend to confuse this with thinking, oh, well, then I'm just going to eat cupcakes all day. You know, I'm going to be really unhealthy if I do that. But I think when it comes down to it, a lot of the time, when we give ourselves the freedom to eat whatever we want, naturally, we want to honor what our body needs and what makes it feel its best. So we tend to want to eat a salad sometimes. And yeah, we'll have a cupcake as well. But, you know, it's about kind of honoring what your body, what it needs and what makes it feel its best.
How do people initially get over that guilt? I mean, I believe that transition, say that you've been believing all this messaging for so
Yeah.
long about diet culture, and say you have a salad, then you eat that cupcake, and the guilt that sets in with that. How do you initially overcome that so you get to a point where you feel free of that guilt and you can happily eat that?
So essentially, it just comes down to practice a lot of the time.
Mm.
With a lot of my clients, we do a lot of journaling, a lot of like thinking about food and how it makes us feel. But I think like exposing yourself to that food. So exposure therapy and allowing yourself unconditional permission to eat whatever you want. And if that means like one day you have 5 cupcakes, that's okay. And what I kind of practice is saying, well, just letting yourself know that that is okay if you do that. Like, it's not good, it's not bad. Food is, it has no moral value. So it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just different foods. And different foods provide you with different things. And I think it's really just does come down to relearning how food makes you feel, and that food, is not good or bad, but it's just something that you eat.
A lot of people, I guess, would get a bit argumentative around that argument because of for so long we've heard that things like sugar and carbs and cupcakes and cakes and biscuits are labeled as bad foods.
Yeah.
But in your experience in learning what you're doing and in the practice that you're doing, how are they not labeled bad foods? Like, how are we supposed to explain to people that these are actually not bad? And as you said, all food is just food.
Yeah. So I think it does just come down to context. In, different contexts, different foods are going to, like, we're going to want to have different foods in different contexts, essentially. And yes, cupcakes contain sugar. Like, sugar is not necessarily a bad nutrient. We actually need sugar because it gives our body energy. It fuels our brain. It, does so many different things in the body. And I think a lot of nutrients or a lot of things have been demonized. But I think when we think about it in the context of, okay, if I have 1 cupcake in my day, but then I've also had, 3 really balanced meals, like, is that actually a bad thing? Like, of course, it's not ideal to be eating 20 cupcakes for a day. But it's also not ideal if you just had, 3 bowls of broccoli a day, because again, that's not very balanced. What we want to do is, I guess, zoom out rather than honing in on certain foods and saying this food is good, this food is bad, having a look at your diet as a whole. Because when we zoom out and we say, okay, well, you had 3 cupcakes for the whole week, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I guess, like, looking at the diet as more of a whole rather than honing in on specific foods, I think is a really helpful way to look at it, rather than just saying this food is good, this food is bad. I'm good if I eat this food, or I'm bad if I eat this food. Because the reality is 1 cupcake is not, negatively affecting your health. It's kind of the average of your diet over a long period of time.
Mhm. And I heard this thing once where someone said to me that when I was going through my own recovery of my eating disorder, and they said to me, perfect cupcake example. And they were like, if you have a cupcake and you stress so much about eating the cupcake, that is doing more damage to your body, the stress that you're going through in order to get to just taking a bite of that cupcake, than actually just eating it and enjoying it.
Exactly. 100%. I think when we take away a lot of that guilt and fear around food, like, that is so much more beneficial than cutting out any food in your diet. Absolutely.
I mean, in your experience, you obviously said that you went through some disordered eating and body image issues when you
Mm-hmm.
were younger and growing up. How did you get over it, and how did you find ways to accomplish food freedom in your life?
I think for me, it was definitely a long process over kind of a couple of years. I think it got to a point where I realized, this is probably not very healthy for me, that I'm obsessing over food. I'm counting calories all the time. I'm constantly feeling cold. I've, lost a significant amount of weight, and I'm not feeling very energized. And I think it just kind of clicked one day where I was like, you know what, this is actually not feeling so great for me. I probably need to eat more. I need to be more free with my diet. And yeah, it was definitely a very slow process of slowly kind of introducing foods and feeling okay with eating certain things. And I think it was, as I said before, like exposure therapy, exposing yourself to foods, getting used to them, having them again. And definitely at the start, it was the point where I couldn't have peanut butter in the house, because I would eat, if I had peanut butter in the house, I would eat a whole jar of it in 2 days. And like, it's so silly to me now that I'm like, oh my goodness, how could I, like, it's bizarre to think that I was so obsessed with peanut butter. Like, I love peanut butter, but I think that's really shows how, when you are in a really restrictive mindset, how obsessive you can become over food, and how much that can trigger things like binge eating, or overeating certain foods, or obsessing over certain foods, or feeling like you can't have things in the house. Because when you restrict all of those foods, you just generally want them more. And I think, from then, I guess, allowing myself and giving myself unconditional permission to eat whatever I want, have these things in the house, make sure they were always there. And the more that your brain gets used to having those things, the less that it feels obsessed with them, and the less that it feels like, oh my God, I need to eat the entire thing that's there to get rid of it, or so that it's, I can stop thinking about it. Because then you just tend to forget it's there, because you're like, oh, I can have that all the time. I can have that whenever I want, and it's okay, and it's going to be there tomorrow. And so I don't need to eat the whole thing right now. So I think generally, if you are coming from, quite a restrictive diet, being more free and really, giving yourself unconditional permission to have whatever food you want is the greatest tool you have in feeling more free with your food.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because there is a lot of people that I guess come from a restrictive diet and then start reintroducing those foods. And as you said, they have this fear that they're not going to be able to stop themselves, that once they bring it into the house. But I love this post that you did about keeping, I think it was the 5 blocks of chocolate in your house at all times. Love that idea. So great. But I guess for someone that is reintroducing those foods, I even know that when I was experiencing it, you get to a point where you just don't know how to stop. And this overwhelming fear, it's like this urge that comes over you, and you can't see it through. And the only way to get rid of the emotion that's attached with eating that food is eating it and not being able to stop. Are there any tools or ways that someone, when they're first starting and reintroducing these foods, that they can somehow walk away and prevent that wave from overwhelming them with emotion?
I think it is really tricky. And I think with all of my clients who I recommend, to try that and like have, whatever food it is that they feel like they can't have in the house, like buy an unlimited amount of it and keep that in the house at all times. And I think, the thing is, you probably are going to eat quite a bit of it to start with, and that is totally normal. But the thing is, when you do that a few times, or even if it's, even if you do it 5 times, 10 times, eventually your brain is going to start being like, okay, like, we get it. It's here all the time now. I actually don't feel like it as much because I've eaten so much of it. And that scarcity mindset tends to go away. I guess the other thing that can be really helpful is something that we call urge surfing. So a lot of the time, especially with binge eating, we tend to feel the urge to want to go and, get something from the fridge and, start, I guess, like binging. And I guess what I like to think about it, or how I like to think about it, is the urge is like a wave. So it's, a wave that's kind of going up and it's about to break. And generally we get up to this peak of the wave where the urge is the strongest and we feel like we really, really want to go and do this thing. And generally, if we kind of are able to surf the urge out, so you get on your little surfboard and you just kind of wait it out, it tends to crash and go away after a little while. So what can be really helpful is if you're finding that you're starting to get the urge to go and do something, finding something to distract yourself for 5-10 minutes, or putting a timer on your phone, or saying, okay, I'm just going to wait for 10 minutes and I'm going to see if that urge is still there. I will go and, make myself a snack, or, whatever it is. But really just trying to distract yourself, even if it's like you write down a list of, all these different things that you really enjoy doing that are quite mentally stimulating. And then when you're feeling that urge come on, saying, okay, I'm going to go and do one of these things that I really enjoy doing, as a way to distract myself from this urge that I'm having. Because yeah, it can be quite hard to break that cycle sometimes. And sometimes just waiting out that feeling for it to go away can be a really helpful thing to do. I guess something else to think about is thinking about what emotion is triggering that urge for you, because a lot of the time, especially with binge eating or overeating, it can be triggered by different emotions. So whether you're feeling lonely or sad or anxious about something, there's so many different reasons why we would be triggered. And I guess like having a think about that and identifying the situations where this is happening, and being able to put a plan in place so that, when you do start to feel that emotion or that feeling coming on, you've got a bit of a backup where you're like, well, I know what is going to actually make me feel better in this situation. And I'm going to go do one of those things that is going to actually address that feeling and that emotion, rather than eating, which I know is going to slightly make me feel better or maybe mask those emotions. But in the long run, it's tending to make me feel worse. So I think really going into it with a bit of a plan can be really, really helpful.
I couldn't agree more. I think that that preparation period, especially in those initial moments, if you have something when you're not in the heat of the moment that you know that you can just turn to, I think is so, so helpful for people. And it's so easy to follow rather than getting to that moment and feeling all the emotions and being like, oh my God, I've got to think of something, I've got to do something. You've
Yeah,
already got something set out. It just takes away that extra stress of having to think about something.
definitely. And I think as well, like a lot of the time, the most important period to think about things is the time after you maybe have had a binge or an overeating episode, and really just reflecting on that and saying, okay, well, what actually happened there, what maybe triggered this, and how was I feeling, so that next time the same thing happens, you can maybe rationalize with those feelings a little bit better, and maybe think of a bit more of a plan for if you do start feeling like that again. I think reflecting on it is the most important part, and really trying to be kind to yourself in that moment as well, and thinking, this is just a learning opportunity for me to, change things next time, rather than I don't need to restrict myself or do anything to compensate for this, but let's just reflect and think about what was happening there and what can we do differently.
I think that's one of the greatest tools is learning to know yourself and your triggers and then figuring out how you can best support yourself. So, yes, completely agree. And then, I mean, once a person has accomplished food freedom, what does that actually look like? Obviously, it's going to look like something different for everyone, but even in your situation, how do you know that you've accomplished that? And do you still experience days where they might be not so great and you still have those thoughts around restrictive eating and things like that?
Yeah. So I guess like having food freedom is just being able to eat whatever you want without any fear, without any guilt, and just generally not focusing on food too much realistically. Because I think, yeah, obviously when we diet and when we are feeling restrictive with food, it's often something that people tend to hyper focus on. So I think just feeling, spontaneous with food, feeling like you can go and eat anything, like honestly, just not thinking about it too much would be the main thing. I guess personally, I honestly don't think about it too much at all these days, which is probably, yeah, a good thing in terms of feeling really, really free with food. I guess we all have days where we don't feel great about our bodies, or, where we feel a bit down about things or not feeling our best, and that's totally normal. But I guess in terms of those days, they are very few and far between these days. And I think I tend to just move on after, you have a bad thought and you're like, okay, that was weird. Anyway, like let's move on with our day. And I think, there are always going to be those negative thoughts that tend to pop up, especially as I said before, with social media and like comparison and everything else that is essentially just a part of our lives. But I think being able to navigate those thoughts and just, I guess, get on with life and realizing that, you know what, it's actually not super important to me, how I look, or, really focusing on my food and that kind of thing isn't actually going to make me feel any better. It's not going to hugely positively impact my life. And it's probably just going to make me feel worse if I dwell on these thoughts. So I think, yeah, just getting on with it, honestly, is
Mm.
the best thing to do.
Is there like one thing that centers you or always brings you back to, I guess, your purpose and your why? Like a lot of people have, breathing techniques that they hold on to, or certain friend groups that they really connect to. But is there something that always just brings you back to your core and keeps motivating you to keep going?
Oh, I guess like things that center me would just be, having time to myself, definitely. Like I love um just doing my own thing. And I think being outside and moving my body definitely tends to make me feel centered and connected to myself. I know like exercise can be quite a negative thing for many people if they are dieting a lot and that kind of thing. But I think for me, obviously, how I feel about things now, movement is such an important part of my day and an important part of my life. And it just makes me feel so connected to my body. I don't, track workouts or do anything like that. But I just find like when I move my body, I just feel so good. And I think that really tends to center me and always makes me feel a lot better mentally.
Mm. I think that's when you've got a healthy or good relationship with your body and exercise, when you're getting a feeling out of it, not say, a result
Yeah,
that we all are
definitely.
chasing. Oh,
Definitely.
well, thank you so much for jumping on today and sharing a lot about your story and what you're doing in your practice. Before we run away, any final tips? I know it's been so useful today with everything that you've shared, but there are one or two things that you've learnt in your journey and even that you share in your practice that could help someone out there that may be listening.
Yeah. I would say I think eating balanced meals and not restricting any macronutrient, especially. So making sure you're having some carbs in your meals, having some protein, some fats, because I think a lot of the time, carbs and fats tend to get demonized, and protein is like, I have to have so much protein. But I think the reality of it is that you need all of those things. And I think when we do have all of those things and make a really satisfying meal, we tend to feel a lot better. And I think sometimes eating more than you think is a much better thing if you're feeling like you can't stop thinking about food, or you're just not feeling your best. Making sure that you are eating regularly, you're eating enough, and you're not restricting yourself or depriving yourself of any foods. And if you are struggling, definitely reaching out and getting help from, your GP, a psychologist, a dietitian, or even just talking to a friend about it who you trust, I think can be so, so, so important. But yeah, just knowing that there is always help out there, and chatting to someone about it if you feel like you are struggling.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And throughout everything, congratulations on your own journey and coming to where you are today, because we all know it is a hard and long journey no matter where you're at. So congratulations on that and everything that you're doing in your practice. I'm sure you're doing wonders and helping so many people. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great.
No worries. And where can people find you as well if they want to reach out?
Yes. So I am on Instagram and TikTok at Healthy Bod, Healthy Mind. So yeah, you can reach me there.
Amazing. Well, once again, thank you so much for jumping on today and sharing everything that you've learned. And as well to everyone else out there, thank you for jumping on for another Secret Sunday session. We'll catch you all very soon.